Quality builds, the center point between the strength and dexterity builds, and a favorite among the Soulsborne series since the dawn of Demon Souls and Dark Souls. In Elden Ring, however, this reputation is poor to say the least. The reason for this is because most players often start between level 1 to 10 and end the game around 100 to 175, and with this, the quality infusion is always going to be suboptimal, as standard is going to dominate the early game, but keen and heavy are going to dominate due to scaling. This has many players feel that quality builds really don't fit anywhere in the game, and for the most part, the quality infusion struggles to be competitive until you're overleveled, where it may not even be the best because you get things like the Guardian Sword Spear as well as Bullet Ash's War, which just kind of go better for keen anyways. But despite all of this, quality builds can be genuinely valid even in meta levels, and proof of this is going to be something like the Bloodhound's Fang. And while quality may not be the best build out there, it is an entirely valid way to play the game with an incredible level of versatility that can be competitive, it's just not the infusion. And the reason for this is twofold: status infusions as well as somber weapons. Alright, let me explain. For quality infusions, there's actually 4 valid infusions, and the worst one just happens to be the quality infusion itself. It loses out on Keen versus Bullet Ashes of War, and it loses out on both Keen and Heavy for raw AR, one-handed or two-handed, unless you're overleveled, as I said previously. And yes, I'm going to say overleveled because you're still better off putting those stats into Faith, Endurance, Mind, potentially even Arcane if you want to go with Cult Infusion. And for the most part, those are going to serve you better than just going a quality build at level 200. I can only recommend the quality infusion for higher new game cycles on a pure physical build who doesn't plan on using any spells outside of weapon buff spells, and yet occult still might be a better option. There are, however, 3 other choices that are kind of optimal for a quality build even in meta levels that are kind of genuinely really good and can actually even outscale the quality infusion, and that's going to be Cold, Blood, and yes, even Poison. These are usually only good with weapons with natural quality scalings, such as the Claymore, the Knight's Greatsword, the Banished Halberd, the Lance, the Venomous Fangs, as well as the Banished Knight's Greatsword. And while you can point out that there are other better options, have a higher native dex or strength scaling, the reason why these are much more beneficial is the fact that while something like a Iron Greatsword might have a higher AR, you gotta look at the value of the moveset, and oftentimes this reach, range, moveset all can lead to doing more damage on the infusible one than something that is going to be much harder to aim, much harder to land, have a really terrible moveset, and some of them are the only infusible one in their category. It can be pointed out that the Cold Infusion also scales with Intelligence, and the Blood and Poison Infusion scale with Arcane as well, but they aren't necessarily important for these builds to work in terms of raw AR. When you're optimizing for that, you might actually prefer just to go a quality build. And there's several reasons for this. For example, Arcane's really the only one that's worth going because it increases the status effect, a status buildup. You may as well just go for the much more valid option, but the status effects have diminished returns, and something like Poison kind of stays on the target. So when you look at the cost of diminished returns and versatility, it's a small price to pay for a 5 to 10% increase in AR. And yes, it could be even higher when you look at something like the Banished Knight Greatsword or the Banished Knight Halberd, as the Greatsword scales better with strength while the Halberd scales better with dexterity. When you look at that and cut the difference, you'd actually get about a 15% increase with the proper amount of investment on both builds relative to one another. It gives you that additional level of versatility where you don't have to lose so much damage versus the other. And while I know I shouldn't have to go over why both Keen and Cold Infusions are great, the status debuff and the burst from Cold and Blood proc paired with some solid AR, and oftentimes you can pair these builds with something terrifying and iconic, like a Blood or Frost Stormblade. On top of that, Ice Spear is still a valid way. It's actually a reason why I'm going to say that it is probably the second most valid way to play a Bullet Ash War build outside of a pure Keen build. And I know that somebody's going to be looking at it, it's like, oh wait, you mentioned Poison earlier. Well, Poison is often seen as like the weaker of the two Arcane based ones, and it's a weaker form of Scarlet Rot, but when I'm talking about Poison, Poison can still be good for PvP, but it can also be good for something like the Venomous Fangs, which applies Deadly Poison, which does about the same amount of damage as Scarlet Rot, and yet it inflicts enemies with it pretty quickly, and yet it lasts a decent while. You really don't need that additional Arcane scaling from something like Occult or any other Arcane thing out there at all, because you're already going to proc it, even on something like Fire Giant with relative ease. and pretty quickly at that, and for the full duration. And for PvP, it's just a good way to pressure enemies, especially those with high latency that's hard to tag down. And while yes, arcane skill could help here in technicality, you really don't need it, especially when you're able to apply poison buffs to your weapon. And you may wonder, hey, okay, wait, why would I go quality build than any other build like a pure strength or pure dexterity? And that's mostly due to soft caps, which becomes especially relevant around like 40 to 50 levels, but it gets much more significant than that around like 55, 60, 70, and 80. Especially when you include things like the two-handed property for strength, as well as dex can benefit from both the tier as well as Millicent's prosthesis. And you can gain some double benefits from something like Godric's Great Rune. And of course, what I mentioned previously is variety. But even after all that, that is not the reason why quality builds are kind of relevant and kind of really good. But a rather critical aspect that people oftentimes miss is quality builds center around somber weapons quite often. And while the Bloodhound Fang is iconic, there are other amazing quality weapons in the game. Let's look at two of the strongest. The Stormhawk Axe and the Dragon Halberd. And despite the fact that it visibly seems like there's a higher strength scaling, it's not by much, so therefore you're better off to like split the stats 50-50. And in general, they're great weapons because they're early game obtainable and they do an incredible amount of damage, especially with the self-buff property. In fact, the Dragon Halberd itself is just one of the best unique weapons in the game because it has an exceptionally high AR. Yes, it has that Frost Lightning, making it strong in the early game, and with the quality, it kind of boosted to the late game. And for the Stormhawk Axe, I don't need to explain. For PvP, it is going to delete people because it's hard to escape it, even compared to the normal Stormcaller. Quickly going over the Bloodhound's Fang, it doesn't really need an introduction. It is impossible to emphasize how insane this weapon actually is. This weapon, defined speedruns, is a poster child for the quality build, and while passable PvP at best, the skill, the raw AR, and the charge attacks are simply incredible. Though there's one final aspect I really do need to talk about that kind of gets ignored with quality builds, and that is their attention to colossal weapons. In fact, 6 out of 9 of the unique colossal weapons are quality, and 2 of them could actually be incredibly powerful. One due to its incredibly high AR, its piercing damage, its incredibly long reach, and the fact its unique skill is still quite confident despite the nerfs. And we're talking about the Fallen Star Beastjaw. Despite the nerfs, it has the highest AR out of any colossal weapon, and a skill akin to the infamous Thunderbolt Ash of War. On top of that, piercing damage is amazing just because you get the counterattack on top of it, but the Ash of War is incredible just because it is a long-range option that can actually do a solid amount of damage. A bit of an issue is the intelligence requirement, which could usually be got around through swapping around a couple talismans. Yeah, despite the intelligence requirement, it doesn't really scale on intelligence at all. And the final colossal melee weapon I'm going to talk about is one that's going to be the most controversial, but it can be situationally very, very powerful. And that is going to be the Wheel of Giza, also known as the Pizza Cutter, and this is due to its unique heavy attacks, which actually makes this a consecutive attack build, and it can proc bleed in seconds. It is incredibly great on a quality build, and yeah, if you were to focus it correctly, and you could also build it with either the Jellyfish Shield or Sacred Order in the offhand, it can do an insane amount of damage. And the Ash of War isn't necessary because the Ash of War itself isn't really that great. The weapon itself could actually pack a punch because if you're playing an optimized build, even without an absurd amount of buffs, it could pack over 10,000 damage in a single hit. The final weapon I need to actually cover, because I kind of forgot to do this earlier, is going to be Great Bows. Great Bows are almost always quality weapons. Yes, they have a higher affinity to scale strength, but they do have overall higher dex requirements, and they are optimally done best on a split dex and strength build anyways. The only exception to this is the Golem Great Bow, which does have the highest AR, but has the least amount of versatility among the Great Bows because of the skill it's given. All that being said, the big thing about quality is, yeah, there's options. It's a totally viable build. Is it the best build? No, absolutely not. It clearly has a place in this game. It is still going to be relatively decent at meta levels, and it gets even better from there. Now, is it going to be great in meta levels all the time? No, it's going to struggle. However, if you were to look at something like Bloodhound's Fang, then you could argue it's one of the best, if not the best. Sorry, that's my deep dive in terms of quality builds. I know I haven't posted much recently. This video should have been out last year, but I did procrastinate, and that is all on me. That being said, I've been cooking up a couple videos as of late, and I hope that you guys will enjoy them. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have an awesome day.